The sun rises over Constantinople on August 15th, 1714, but its light brings no warmth to the square where 5 wooden stakes stand waiting. The air smells of fear and incense, and in the shadow of the Ottoman palace, a Romanian prince kneels in chains alongside his 4 sons, watching executioners sharpen their blades. Constantin Brâncoveanu, ruler of Wallachia for 25 years, has been brought here not for treason or rebellion, but for refusing to betray his faith. The Sultan has given him one final choice: convert to Islam and live, or watch his family die before joining them in agony. History will remember what he chooses, but first, it will record every scream. Constantin Brâncoveanu was not born to wear a crown. He came into the world in 1654 as the son of minor Wallachian nobility, growing up in a land crushed between 3 empires: the Ottomans to the south, the Austrians to the west, and the Russians to the east. Wallachia was a Christian principality forced to pay tribute to Muslim overlords, and its princes lived and died at the Sultan's pleasure. Constantin learned early that survival required cunning, and when he seized power in 1688, through careful alliances and well-placed bribes, he proved himself a master of political theater. He built churches and monasteries across his lands, adorning them with gold and frescoes that told stories of martyrs who chose death over apostasy. He patronized artists and scholars, turning his court into a beacon of Orthodox culture. But beneath the piety and splendor, Constantin played a dangerous game, secretly sending letters to the Austrians and Russians, offering allegiance if they would help him break free from Ottoman control. For over 2 decades, he balanced on a knife's edge, presenting himself as a loyal vassal while plotting rebellion in whispered conversations behind monastery walls. The Ottoman Sultan Ahmed III was not a fool. Spies infiltrated Constantin's court, intercepting letters and bribing servants to report every secret meeting. By 1714, the evidence of treason had grown too large to ignore. Constantine had been caught negotiating with Peter the Great of Russia, offering to join an Orthodox alliance against the Sultan. In March of that year, Ottoman soldiers arrived at Constantin's palace in Bucharest with a simple message: "The Sultan requests your presence in Constantinople." It was not a request. Constantin knew what awaited him in the Ottoman capital, but he also knew that refusal meant immediate war and the slaughter of his people. So he gathered his family, his 4 sons, Constantin, Ștefan, Radu, and Matei, along with his trusted advisor, Ionuț Văcărescu, and rode south toward the sea. His wife and daughters were left behind, weeping in the palace courtyard as the procession disappeared beyond the hills. Constantin never looked back, but his hand trembled on the reins, and those who rode beside him later said his lips moved constantly in silent prayer. Constantinople was a city of marble and menace, where the Topkapi Palace loomed over the Bosphorus like a monument to absolute power. Constantin and his sons were led through its gilded halls into a reception chamber where Sultan Ahmed III sat on a throne elevated above the floor, surrounded by janissaries whose curved swords caught the lamplight. The Sultan's face was unreadable as he listed Constantin's crimes: secret correspondence with enemy powers, promises of military support to Christian armies, embezzlement of tribute payments meant for the Ottoman treasury. Each accusation was true, and Constantin did not bother to deny them. Instead, he stood silent, his sons arranged behind him like steps of a staircase, each one younger and more terrified than the last. The Sultan leaned forward, his voice soft but carrying through the chamber like a blade sliding from its sheath. "There is a way to save yourself and your family," he said. "Renounce your Christ, embrace the true faith of Islam, and I will restore you to your throne with greater wealth and power than before." The offer hung in the air, and for a moment, the only sound was the distant call to prayer echoing from a nearby minaret. Constantin Brâncoveanu looked at his sons, then back at the Sultan. His voice, when he spoke, was steady as stone. "I was born a Christian, and I will die a Christian. My sons were born in the faith, and they will die in it, if that is God's will. Better to lose an earthly kingdom than to gain the world and forfeit our souls." The words sealed their fate. The Sultan's expression did not change, but his hand lifted in a small gesture, and the janissaries moved forward. Constantin and his family were dragged from the chamber, their protests swallowed by the vastness of the palace. They were thrown into a dungeon beneath the Topkapi, a stone cell where water dripped from the ceiling and rats skittered in the darkness. For 5 months, they waited in that hole, fed only enough to keep them alive while the Sultan considered their punishment. Constantin spent those months teaching his youngest son, Matej, who was only 11 years old, the prayers and psalms their family had recited for generations. The boy's voice echoed off the wet stones, fragile and unwavering, while his father held his hand in the dark. August 15th, 1714, was the Feast of the Assumption of Mary, one of the holiest days in the Orthodox calendar. The Sultan chose it deliberately, a calculated insult to the faith Constantin refused to abandon. At dawn, the prisoners were pulled from their cell and marched to a public square near the palace, where a crowd had already gathered merchants and beggars, janissaries and diplomats, all drawn by the promise of spectacle. 5 wooden stakes had been driven into the ground, each one standing 7 feet tall with a sharpened point at the top. Beside them, executioners prepared their tools, axes, hammers, and ropes. Constantin and his sons were forced to kneel in a line, their hands bound behind their backs, while Ianache Vacarescu knelt at the end, his weathered face pale but composed. The Sultan's representative read the sentence aloud in Turkish, then in Greek, so the Christian witnesses would understand. These men are guilty of treason against the sublime Ottoman state, and they will die as traitors die, so that all may see the price of betrayal. The executioner approached the youngest son first. Matej, 11 years old, with dark curls and eyes wide with terror, began to weep. Constantin turned his head, though his own body was held in place by guards, and spoke to his son in Romanian. "Be brave, my child. We go to meet Christ, who loves us more than any earthly father could. Do not fear the pain, it is brief, but heaven is forever." Matej's sobs quieted, and he nodded once, tears streaming down his cheeks. The executioner raised his axe, and with a single stroke, the boy's head rolled into the dust. His small body crumpled forward, blood pooling beneath the stake where he had knelt. Constantin closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, but he did not look away for long. The executioner moved to the next son, then the next, working down the line with mechanical efficiency. Radu, 16 years old, cried out for his mother as the blade fell. Stefan, 18, recited the Jesus prayer until the axe cut the words from his throat. Constantin Jr., 26 and the eldest, stood tall and silent, his father's pride reflected in his face even as it was severed from his body. Each execution took less than a minute, but Constantin Brâncoveanu watched every one, forced to witness the obliteration of his lineage before his own death. Ianache Vacarescu was next, the loyal advisor who had followed Constantin into captivity rather than abandon him. The old man's execution was swift, a single blow that dropped him beside the princes he had served. And then, only Constantin remained. The crowd had grown silent, even the most hardened spectators unnerved by what they had witnessed. Constantin knelt in a spreading lake of his son's blood, his robes soaked crimson, his face pale but unbroken. The Sultan's representative approached and made one final offer. "Even now, if you convert, your life will be spared." Constantin's reply was loud enough for the entire square to hear. "I have seen my sons enter paradise before me. I will not dishonor their sacrifice by clinging to this world." The executioner stepped forward, but the Sultan had ordered something different for Constantin, not a quick death, but a lingering one. They laid him on his back and brought forth a wooden stake, thicker than the others, with a rounded but cruel point. This was the traditional Ottoman method for traitors and rebels: impalement, designed to prolong suffering for hours or even days. The executioner and his assistants positioned the stake at Constantin's body, angling it carefully to avoid immediately fatal organs. They drove it upward with hammers and ropes, forcing it through his lower back and up through his torso in a path calculated to miss the heart and lungs. Constantin's screams tore through the square, raw and inhuman, the sound of a man being destroyed from the inside while remaining conscious. His body convulsed with each strike of the hammer, but the ropes held him in place, preventing him from thrashing free. When the stake emerged from his upper chest near the shoulder, they hoisted him upright, raising the stake so that Constantin hung suspended above the ground, his weight driving the wood deeper into his body with every breath. Blood poured from the entry and exit wounds, dripping onto the earth below in steady streams. His face contorted in agony, mouth open in a silent scream as shock began to set in. The crowd, many of whom had cheered for the beheadings, now stood in horrified silence. Even the janissaries looked away, unwilling to meet the eyes of the dying prince. Constantin Brâncoveanu did not die quickly. The impalement had been expertly done, avoiding major arteries and organs in a way that prolonged his suffering. He hung on that stake for hours as the sun climbed higher, baking the square in August heat. Flies gathered on his wounds, and his blood dried in dark streaks down the wood. Witnesses later reported that Constantin remained conscious for much of his ordeal, his lips moving in prayer even as his body failed. He hung there as the crowd gradually dispersed, as merchants returned to their stalls and children were hurried away by their parents. He hung there as the afternoon shadows lengthened and the call to prayer echoed 5 times from the city's minarets. Some said he lasted until evening. Others claimed he survived through the night and into the next day. The accounts vary, but all agree on this. Constantin Brâncoveanu refused to renounce his faith even as life drained from his body, and when death finally came, his eyes were open and fixed on the sky above Constantinople, as if seeing something beyond the pain and blood and cruelty of the world below. The bodies were left on display for 3 days as a warning to any other vassal princes who might consider rebellion. Birds pecked at the corpses, and dogs fought over scraps that fell to the ground. On the 3rd day, Orthodox Christians from Constantinople's Greek quarter were permitted to collect the remains. They wrapped Constantin and his sons in linen shrouds and buried them in a small chapel outside the city walls, far from the glory of the churches Constantin had built in his homeland. But the story did not end in that unmarked grave. Word of Constantin's martyrdom spread through the Orthodox world like fire through dry grass. Churches added his name to their litanies, and painters depicted his execution in icons that showed him standing before Christ while his sons knelt at his feet, all of them crowned with halos of martyrdom. In 1992, nearly 3 centuries after his death, the Romanian Orthodox Church formally canonized Constantin Brâncoveanu and his 4 sons as saints and martyrs, recognizing them as men who chose torture and death over the betrayal of their faith. Their feast day is August 16th, the day after their execution, when believers light candles and remember the prince who watched his children die rather than deny Christ. The story of Constantin Brâncoveanu forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about faith, power, and the price of conviction. Was his choice heroic or tragic? Did he save his sons' souls by leading them to martyrdom, or did he doom them through his own stubbornness? The Sultan offered him life, wealth, and power, everything a man could want in the earthly realm. But Constantin saw that offer as poison disguised as mercy, a temptation to trade eternal truth for temporary comfort. His execution was not unique in history. Thousands have been impaled, beheaded, and tortured for refusing to compromise their beliefs. What sets Constantin apart is the deliberate cruelty of forcing him to witness his children's deaths first, understanding that the sharpest blade is not the one that cuts flesh, but the one that severs a parent from their child. The Sultan wanted Constantin to break, to prove that every man has a price, that faith crumbles under sufficient pain. But Constantin did not break. He hung on that stake, bleeding and dying, and in his refusal to submit, he became something the Sultan could not kill. An idea, a symbol, a reminder that some souls cannot be conquered even when their bodies are destroyed. If this story made you think, don't look away. Like, share, and subscribe for more dark truths buried beneath history's blood-stained pages, because the past isn't dead, it's still warning us. The stakes may look different now, but the question Constantin faced remains the same. What would you die for? What price would you pay to remain true to yourself? History doesn't offer easy answers, only the blood-soaked lessons of those who came before. Subscribe to The Bleeding Past, and let's uncover them together.